And we are live. So, one of the reasons why I wanted to do MMA content and cover mixed martial arts in total is because when you cover mixed martial arts, it's oh, sorry about the little overlap there. So, the reason why I really wanted to do MMA content and cover mixed martial arts, UFC, and boxing as a whole is because of the fact that when you are covering mixed martial arts, you're not only covering one particular sport, and not only that, you're not only covering one circumference of a sport, but rather an entire lifestyle, an entire religion, an entire way of doing things in different countries in terms of routines, in terms of training methods. And not only that, understanding the cultural barriers and cultural similarities that come with mixed martial arts. So I'm not attempting to make this particular content about a particular life story of mine by any stretch of the imagination, but rather to try to explain to people as to why I would be a formidable competition to, let's say, journalists and other MMA content out there. For one, obviously, we are in the sphere of YouTube content creation. And so, because of that, we're trying to garner attention and we're trying to cover mixed martial arts. Obviously, it's a very redundant process in the way that everybody does it. They do the prediction shows, they do the preview shows, they give you a breakdowns of the kicks and the punches. Some may know what they're talking about, some may not. Again, I let you judge for yourself whether I know what I'm talking about or not, just based on these particular pictures that you're looking at. So, again, this is not trying to make it into about my life story, but rather why I would be a very useful tool in the world of MMA and in terms of trying to explain a storyline, in terms of trying to explain how the public can relate to certain people's stories or certain struggles or, let's say, similarities that you can draw from in different cultural mashings, such as, for example, you can take a look at similarities in, let's say, Conor McGregor and Tupac Shakur. Now, what MMA content would go out there and boldly say something like that? Well, these are some of the things that I can offer because I'm trying to give you insights on from understanding, let's say, growing up in the 90s, what kind of rebellious mentality an artist like Tupac had, and in relationship to how that can be influencing to, let's say, a young Conor McGregor growing up in Dublin. So those are some of the things that I can offer in terms of MMA content that is ever redundant in the world of copycat leagues, because oftentimes Joe Rogan and many other commentators out there always cite how the UFC is a copy league when it comes to the fighters and the techniques that they imply. Well, if it works, if a calf kick is what works and a lot of people are winning big results with it, why change it and stop doing it if it works, right? So ultimately, everybody is going to do that. Well, in MMA content creation and MMA YouTubing, you often notice that everybody is doing the same thing. They try to catch a certain algorithm by, let's say, not putting too much videos in a particular day. Maybe they'll post two instead of four, which kind of maybe hinders a bit of their potential or the type of stories that they can put out there at a certain moment of time. Perhaps maybe it gives you a sense of feeling accomplished in thinking that you are a better MMA YouTuber than you actually aren't. Because let's face it, some guys, and I'm not saying that they're not great, but they just have the right strategy. And mm, I don't know if I'm a strategic kind of person in the way that I would, let's say, release my content or anything like that. I don't know if I would be the type that would even be careful as to what particular subjects I'm willing to touch, as you've seen with the Sean Strickland content that I did with calling him a Nazi champ. Now, obviously, those are some of the things that you have to do in the world of YouTube and in the world of content creation is give a little bit of a shock value. Now, when you listen to me and you listen to how I convey my message and how I cover these fights, is it in any way non objective? Okay, maybe perhaps just like any other fight fan out there, you're going to have certain favorites. And full disclosure, there are certain guys that I have trained with that are active and inactive, both in those sectors of the fight world that I've been involved with. So maybe I'm going to have a certain bias into one side or the other, as opposed to, let's say, all these other mom in the basement MMA content creators where they have no relationships with any fighters out there because of the fact that they just don't go out there and train. They don't go out there and sometimes to the betterment of their content. That's probably great because then they can give you a very objective point of view that, let's say, these other former fighters or people that are involved in the business would never be able to give you. But nonetheless, it is, how do you say this? All subjective in how you want to consume your MMA content and the type of people you want to listen to. But some of the things that I like to offer, once again, is conveying a story in a historical sense. Okay, like for example, if let's say you want to convey a story about how one particular fighter has more of a strategic advantage than the other, you could draw examples of, let's say, World War II and how the Japanese were neutralized through a Hiroshima bomb, and how the Germans had overestimated their methods and their planning as far as their transgressions and lack of understanding the enemy and their failures along the way that led them to the result that you've seen World War II to be, right? These are all the things that you can draw from. And those are the things that I'd like to bring to light because, once again, oftentimes MMA content creation is just repetitive. Everybody wants to do the same thing. Everybody wants to have just a betting show of some sort. Everything is about gambling. So everything is about predictions. And don't get me wrong, I do predictions as well because I do want to display a little bit of my understanding of the sport. And oftentimes, or were a lot of times, where I've gotten a lot of predictions correct. You can look at some of the past videos that have been done here to try to understand where I am with understanding how matches are going to be and how they're going to go. But it's a lot more than just the kicks and punches, right? Like, take for example, you have somebody like Khamzat Chimaev who is now fighting in Abu Dhabi, coming up against Paulo Costa. Now, what can you draw from that? Let's say from a political and geopolitics, world affairs kind of segment. What can you draw from that? Well, for one, take a look at Costa. He's friends with this former Brazilian Prime Minister Bolsonaro, who is basically the South American Trump in the way that he is considered to be anti-indigenous people, at least in the accounts of many Brazilian fighters and many Brazilian people that lean left that would say that. Uh, but nonetheless, Paulo Costa endorses this guy. He hangs out with him. And you have Khamzat Chimaev, who hangs out with Ramzan Kadyrov, who is a very controversial figure at this particular time because of his sworn allegiance to Vladimir Putin. And because of that sworn allegiance, well, guess what? That all ties into the Ukrainian conflict. And then Usyk, of course, is tied into that because even in his fights with Dubois, guess who was on the screen talking right before Usyk was going to go out? It was none other than Zelensky. So all this other stuff that they talk about in the world outside of MMA in the mainstream sports world, they hate it when you try to get political. They try to silence LeBron James from talking about China. The next thing you know, he redacts his statement and goes and makes an apology and all of this and that. Whereas with the MMA world, it's just like these guys are tied to some of the most vile, some of the most craziest, and not only that, some of the most controversial figures, whether you love them or hate them, in the political world. And that in and of itself, I think, is really some of the most interesting aspects of combat sports that a lot of these other MMA content creators are just missing. And I'm not saying they're missing it out totally, but I think that they're not doing enough of, let's say, awareness to these particular topics or issues. Like they just want to get on with the kicks and punches. And of course, again, maintaining the integrity of mixed martial arts channels, I am going to give you that. But while I'm going to give you the kicks and punches, I'm also going to give you the stories of Paulo Costa being affiliated with the likes of Bolsonaro, the controversial South American Brazilian politician, the likes of Kamzat with his relationship with Ramzan Kadyrov and his sons, and how that ties into the world of mixed martial arts and how they're going to be treated in, for how you see comes out right now having troubles getting visa issues. Nobody knows what's up with that. What is going on? Is it just something that the UFC is keeping under wraps because maybe perhaps this is one of those situations that if the UFC has to reveal to the world that, oh, Kamzat has visa issues, he can't fight in the United States because of this conflict in Ukraine, it's just going to bring negative attention to the UFC. Hey, shout outs to Zane, Heavy Boxing Dosage. My man, thanks for tuning in. By the way, guys, don't forget to check out his interview that he did with none other than the boxing pundit Spencer Fearon in London, England, with some of the best boxing content that you will find in the UK and around the world. But yeah, man, nonetheless, it all ties in. And by the way, how I know this is because guess what? I have an understanding for the public relations field, right? It is somewhat of a career that I'm into at the current moment of time. So it is something that I understand from a sports management perspective and how they're going to handle these things and how they're going to keep these things under wraps. Now, do I know for a fact that Khamzat Chimaev has visa issues? Well, no, I don't have the proper evidence in hand to give that to you, but a lot of telltale signs point in that direction. And why do I say that? Well, for one, you take a look at Khamzat Chimaev, right? The guy loves to fight. He loves to fight every week, and he will absolutely go and take any fights that he can, and he has proven that. And then he became famous. Next thing you know, it's harder to get him fights because now he's dangerous. Now the other top ranking guys don't want to lose their rankings in the UFC, so they refuse to fight him, and then it just becomes harder for Khamzat Chimaev to get fights. What did Zane say here? Thanks, bro. Make sure you subscribe to his MMA channel, best underrated channel on YouTube. That's right, my man. That's right. Yes. And by the way, this is a great segment into that because literally this is what this particular content in this live that I'm doing right now is literally about. That it's, yes, at the current moment, it is a very underrated channel from just starting it out really realistically a year ago, but really putting more work into it now within the past couple of months. It's a slow process, but I'm showing the world that this is what I can offer. Just like what I mentioned right now with what's going on with Khamzat Chimaev, right? It has a lot to do with public relations because the UFC is not telling you why he's not able to get fights, but at the same time, they don't want to tell you anything. It better they just leave it not explained and let you think whatever it is that you want to think, kind of like what the royal family does in the UK. And this is why shout out to Zane, who's from the UK. And we always talk about politics with our buddy over there and our mate, Michael Kelly, that crazy guy, always getting us into crazy political conversations. But the royal family in England has a motto that goes something to the extent of never complain, never explain, and never complain. Okay, so that's literally the approach that the UFC has done based on the fact that they're not explaining why Khamzat Chimaev is not fighting. Because then if you try to explain, guess what? It's going to ruin his image of being this boogeyman monster. But at the same time, if you go out and you explain, then you have to open up these can of worms of trying to explain his visa issues and how that ties into the war in Ukraine. And again, this is why I think that this particular war is one-sided to the side of the Ukrainians for obvious reasons because they have the backing of Ukraine and Great Britain. And so, therefore, these Russian fighters are going to get the short end of the stick about it. Now, you look at Alexander Volkov. He's as Russian as they come, right? He is from Moscow, 6'7" Russian guy, UFC heavyweight fighter, right? How is it that he's able to get fights in the United States, Abu Dhabi, and Australia, and all these other NATO states? Well, the reason why is because he's just not tied to the dictators and the likes of Ramzan Kadyrov and Putin in the way that Kamzat is. Now, obviously, why is Kamzat tied to these people? Well, because of the fact that these people, the dictators, they want to be tied to Kamzat. So why would they not be? Kamzat is an absolute badass of a man. He goes out there and takes fights on short notice. And by the way, why are you not seeing him take fights now with this slow activity level that he has had in the past couple of months in comparison to the last couple of years? Well, because again, because of these issues that the UFC doesn't want to be forthright about. And why should they? So, better what they do is, you know what, let's just get you out in Abu Dhabi. Paulo Costa has had experience fighting in Abu Dhabi. He's fought for the title out there. He knows what it's like to compete out there. Let's get Kamzat out there. It is a Muslim population. We're going to get an all-star Muslim card with the likes of Muhammad Makayev and then other guys that even Kamzat has fought in the past that's fighting in that card against Imavov, taking on what is that guy? Ali Sakharov, I think. But he's another Chechnyan guy that Kamzat knocked out in Brave FC back in the Bahrain regional scenes before Kamzat got signed to the UFC. But nonetheless, yes, this is the reason why I love covering this sport, is because I can explain all of these things to you from a different angle. Now, if you want to go into, let's say, the technical aspect of mixed martial arts, I can delve into that as well. For one, you take a look at the way that Kamzat fights, right? What are some things that I've noticed about the way that he fights in comparison to, let's say, other fighters? Well, the Russian Sambo system is very unique in any other form of martial arts out there because they literally emphasize one thing, which is what? MMA in total, kicks and punches and takedowns all rolled in one. You look at Kamzat, the way that he came into the UFC, I believe it was a fight that he had with Reese McKee. How did he open the fight? He literally opened with a few head kicks, low kicks, and then he transitioned the low kick into a double leg takedown, right? Which is very unusual, right? Because usually, if you've ever took, like, let's say, a basic MMA class at an MMA gym, one of the first things that they teach you is 1-2 punches and then shooting for a takedown. And then later on, they'll go for kicks and teach you all those other things. But if you're a Muay Thai gym or a Taekwondo kickboxing gym, they're going to go to kicks right away. But that's neither here or there. So the point of the matter is the way that they transition and put combinations together, it is literally mixed martial arts all rolled into one rather than the compository sports of MMA in its, let's say, in its singularity, right? The Russians and Chechens were able to combine Sambo, obviously, because it is their military form of fighting, into one form of fighting rather than trying to mix all things up. So Sambo is literally street fighting, military style fighting, all rolled into one. And you Kamzat is a very great modern example of that. I mean, the guy has great kicks. He's got great power. Very underrated footwork, by the way, because of the way that he was able to circle GM3, if you notice in that 17 knockout that he got against him, right? It was just like one of those things where you never expected he was going to close in on him like that. But once again, that's where a lot of the underrated footwork comes in, where a lot of people just don't really notice those small things. And by the way, speaking of footwork and boxing and things of that nature, how about this Francis Ngannou Tyson Fury fight? By the way, if you guys want to check out the video that I made concerning Tyson Fury and Usyk and why they're not fighting. The title is called "Usyk is to blame for not fighting Fury. Here's why." So again, one of the reasons that I go into that was that I mentioned something to the effect that Usyk is just not a big draw. And in order for Tyson Fury to go in there and really take on a guy like this, okay, there it has to be a little more than that. There has to be a little bit more incentives because there's just a lot of people out there in the world that are going to go and stream this fight illegally, not pay for it. So they want to make it worthwhile. So what does he do? He goes out and fights the lineal UFC heavyweight champion of the world, Francis Ngannou. And why does he do that? He does that because it is bigger money. But at the same time, does Tyson Fury want to be undisputed? I think a part of him does, and then a part of him doesn't care. And I think that's important to really point out. And again, this segments into why I love this sport so much because not only am I just talking about the kicks and punches and the technical portions of the sport, now I'm going to go into the psychological portions of the sport, the lifestyle portions of how these fighters live. And this is one of the most intriguing ways that I love conveying combat sports to the world. So let's get into it. Tyson Fury has a little bit of a bipolar disorder. And why is that significant? Well, because like I said, there are some days where he's not going to bother with the idea of never being undisputed because he's already held all the belts. To him in his mind. He's the lineal champion. He took the one belt that he never held before, which is a WBC. So in his mind, he is the undisputed champion, just not in the most official terms of having it all at once. Well, now he has an opportunity to do that against Usyk. The fact that he's bipolar and has these mood swings, okay, it is it is a type of Tyson Fury where you never know what you're going to get. But then there's going to be some days where he is going to sign up for this fight, and it's going to be the inevitability of, let's say, his potential downfall to, let's say, more of a superior opponent with higher technical skills and a greater understanding of all the technical aspects that come with boxing. Okay. But at the same time, he doesn't want to fight him because he just doesn't have the right notoriety. Now he goes in here and fights Francis. Guess what? Now he builds the fight even more. Now he builds the promotion with an even higher burden on his shoulders because now he's carried more of the promotion going into the Usyk fight after, let's say, he does beat Francis. Well, now he wants to take on Usyk because now that fight is even bigger, even after the Francis Ngannou performance and the notoriety that he got out of that, and the fact that they're going to go and follow Fury after that particular fight into the Usyk fight. I think that is the most plausible plan that Fury and his team may have in mind, but who knows? Again, it's all up in the air because that's just how Fury is as a person. He's just always up in the air, and you never know how he's going to decide one way or the other. So that's with that. So how about Canelo taking on Charlo this weekend? Here's something that I had noticed, right? I think um there's a very strong similarity with Canelo and Israel Adesanya. And by the way, I'm going to make a separate video about this somewhere down the line, right? I think it's really important to convey this because Israel Adesanya was getting a lot of slack lately for losing to Sean Strickland. And again, we can name all the factors of the fact that he had this situation going on, he had this happening to him, he had um too many fights, he just was not peaking correctly, and he runs across a guy with the wrong style at the wrong time and the wrong accumulation of rounds that Israel Adesanya has managed to put in his account over the years, right? You still can't forget the fact that this guy does everything that a hardcore fan wishes for out of their fighter. And Canelo is no different. He had that one slip up with Bivol. Well, then afterwards, Canelo came back and did what he needed to do. Then he had a fight with Triple G. Now here he is going back into it with a very competitive fight on paper, at least. Now on the fight of the night, on fight night, it's going to be a different story in that particular aspect. But on paper, it's an even fight. You got two guys that are undisputed and they're going to clash and they're going to get it on. Okay. Two best guys in their perspective division taking on each other and then one guy moving up. And yeah, I mean, that's literally Canelo's career in a nutshell, right? Just fight after fight after fight, top competition after top competition. Yeah, for real. I'm definitely going to make a separate video on that particular topic at hand with um Canelo and Izzy and their contribution to their activity that they were able to put out. Because guess what, man? You know, you can debate whether that activity is good one way or another, but the one thing I can tell you is that, you know, it does have its toll and its effect on you, but at the same time, it does build you a legacy that you can't deny. So those are some things that you can't deny Canelo and Izzy about. So I think I'm going to call it wraps on that one right here. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for those that have came and liked and subscribed. And I wanted to say, you know what? I'm thankful, even with just currently 85 subscribers. I'm very thankful for it. I think that's one of the things that I also wanted to give to the MMA content YouTube world is a bit of some gratitude, right? Whether it's just 85 people or 85,000, which eventually I will get to at some point, right? I mean, you just keep grinding, you keep doing it. Eventually, you're going to get the right amount of views, the right amount of subscribers. You just got to stick and grind to it, and people will eventually see your talent for exactly what it is. But nonetheless, that's one of the things I can offer is gratitude. I'm always going to appreciate the smallest things, the smallest comments, the smallest likes. But once you get bigger and you get a little bit more views, maybe that's another story. But that's neither here or there. So once again, this is what I can offer to the mixed martial arts YouTube world and combat sports in general in terms of covering the sport and my knowledge and experience and the likes of characters that I've ran across from around the world regarding mixed martial arts and the people that are involved in it and their interesting stories that I'd like to convey to the world. Thank you once again, and don't forget to like and subscribe.